Hey guys, here's our lecture video for Chapter 9, which deals with visual resources and technology. In this chapter, we're going to talk about some resources you can use to sort of amplify your speech using visuals or other sensory aids that can sort of help your audience and yourself understand your topic a little bit better in a different way than just speaking. You can use these to accentuate your speech. They're not meant to overshadow your speech itself, but they can help in understanding. So we're going to talk about ways to use those effectively. When we talk about these visual resources, we're talking about sensory aids, okay? They're related to our five senses, so seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, okay, our five senses. But your sensory aids are anything other than you that help your audience understand and remember your message, whatever that message may be. They appeal to any of your five senses, so they can be related to seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, any of that, okay? And we'll go over some of those here in a little bit. But the most common one that you guys will use or have the opportunity to use are visual aids. And these are more effective generally when you're in a public speaking situation. Maybe not so much for you guys, since this is more of a one-on-one situation with just you and I, but they're effective when you're in a group of people and you have the ability to project these and use these to your advantage. But again, they're good to talk about. For future reference. Visual aids are the most common sensory aids. It makes things observable, right? It's something you can see. So rather than just talking about something, if you can throw it up on a screen or bring in an example, it's easier for people to actually see that and understand it than just talking about it. This can be through a slideshow, this can be through pictures, this can be through a video, a PowerPoint, a Keynote, any kind of presentation software, a Prezi. Any of those can be really effective tools to use in certain speaking situations. But we use these visual aids and other sensory aids because of something called dual coding. Dual, D-U-A-L, coding, C-O-D-I-N-G, dual coding. And what we mean by that is it uses words and other sensory stimuli to help people learn a little better or understand a little better. People learn differently, right? We've probably heard this before, but there's different learning styles. So there are auditory learners, there are visual learners, and there are kinesthetic learners who learn by doing. Auditory learners learn by hearing, visual learners learn by seeing, kinesthetic learners learn by doing, actually performing the task or what have you. And there's variations of those. You can combine those together. People are very flexible in their learning styles. But anything you can do to help people understand material better is beneficial. And that's why the dual coding using these sensory aids is beneficial. There's some statistics here. Audiences remember 85% of the content 3 hours later when it's been dual coded, when there's more than one sensory stimulation going on. Okay, so audience remember 85% of the content 3 hours later, and 65% 3 days later, when that information has been dual coded in their brains. Okay, versus just 70% 3 hours later without the visual aid, and 10%, which is a drastic change from 65. 3 days when there's no visual content with it. So visuals, clearly can be very powerful in helping your audience understand a message or helping you understand a message too. It can help you to see it as you go. But again, it deals with those learning styles, and anytime you can combine other sensory elements with your speech, with your actual verbal presentation, you're going to be more effective with your audience in helping them retain that information. Okay, so use that whenever you can. That's why these are so important. There are several types of visual aids, and we're just going to go through the list here pretty quickly so you have an idea. These are useful for informative presentations or persuasive presentations. If you ever have to do a demonstration, think like Food Network kind of cooking show, that situation, the visual really sends that home or brings that home so you can, your audience will understand it a little better. But several types of visual aids you guys could use. Think of multimedia materials, so anything like a graphic or a video or an image, or sound, all kind of put together. That's multimedia, more than one media. And again, that can address your sound, your sight, your smell, anything like that. combining those together in a multimedia material. And again, that can be really effective and really easy to put together if you want to mix up your styles. Another one is just text slides. So again, PowerPoint slides, Keynote, Prezi, anything that you can put together as a slideshow will work. They rely on words or phrases. So again, you can put images in there. You don't want to make them too word heavy because that bogs down your audience. You want to add graphics and photos for excitement. Some other tips for presentations. We've probably all seen classroom instances where the professor or your teacher, whoever, has way too much information on the slide and all they're doing is reading off of those slides. Well, no one wants to experience that. I don't generally use presentations when I'm lecturing because I want them to focus more on engaging with me. I want all the focus to be on me. But they can be really effective if they're used well. Okay, so here's some tips for your slideshows. Don't have too many slides. Again, if you have too many, that bogs down your audience. You want sort of the bare minimum to get your point across. And again, with that slide count, you want to also include your images and graphics. That goes into your overall slide count because your audience is going to have to process every one of those slides when you bring it up on screen. So make sure that it's not overwhelming to them. Don't put too much on any slide, and that means don't put too many pictures. Definitely don't put too many words. You want to make sure that you are using phrases and not necessarily long sentences. You want just the gist. You don't want them to have to sit there and process through long sentences because the whole time that they're reading those sentences, they're not focusing on you speaking. So again, you want them to sort of accentuate your speech, not necessarily have them take away from you talking, okay? Same thing with putting images on slides. You want to make sure that the images you put on those slides are big enough for your audience to see them throughout the room, whatever size room that may be. You want your text or your font to be large enough that everyone can see it from the front of the room to the back. If it's too small, the people in the back of the room can't see it, and then they're going to be struggling to read it instead of paying attention, okay? So again, you want to make sure that the font is big enough. You want high contrast, and what we mean by that is you want your colors to not be too similar together so that it's easy to read. Easiest way to do that is black and white, right? Black and white have very stark contrast with each other. But again, you just want to make sure that it's easy to read. You don't want to use, say, a light blue font on top of a red background, right? That's very hard to read. I'm a very visual person, so that it kind of makes your eyes vibrate in a weird way to where it's really hard to read and makes you kind of uneasy. So you want really high contrast. You wouldn't want to put like a yellow font on top of a white background or a white font on top of a yellow background. Easiest rule of thumb is use a dark color and a light font, or a light color and a dark font. Okay, I probably may have repeated myself, but you get the point. You want to make sure there's a light and a dark element. You don't want to put in any of those unnecessary transitions. So, you know, in PowerPoint, you can make your slides bounce in and your content sort of swoosh in from the side and spiral out. You don't want any of that. All that does is distract from the point. You want to give them as much time to process the information itself as possible. And if they're distracted by the movement, again, that takes away from that processing time. They're more focused on the movement than they are on the content itself. So make sure that you are not using any of those crazy animations or transitions. Really important thing is to have a backup plan. We've all been in situations where, well, I especially have, you know, in teaching, that I've had to move to a new room or gone to a different location. My email was down or something like that, and I wasn't able to access the presentation that I had prepared. You have to have a backup plan. So save it several different ways. If you can't get any of those to work, be able to do the presentation without the visual aid. Because again, it's just meant to add to it. You should still be able to do your entire presentation without any visuals, but again, they add to it if you're able to use them. But always have a backup plan because technology doesn't work sometimes. So you want to make sure that you're able to actually perform the speech well without those limitations if there are technological issues. Okay? Don't read your slides to the audience. Again, we discussed that a little while ago. They don't want to be there to you to read them. That's not what they're there for. They're there for you to speak to them. They can read it themselves. You don't need to repeat it to them and just read off the slides. Big thing that a lot of people do is don't turn your back to the audience. They're there to see you. So if you're turned around reading a slide, you're this way, you're not focusing on them. All right, so you always want to have your focus on them. Use blank slides to hide visuals when you want to be the center of attention, okay? So you can just throw some blank, especially if you're using a white or a black background, you can just put in a blank one and it'll just go to a blank screen. And that takes focus away from the presentation back onto you. A lot of projectors now, if you're using a projector, have a button that you can make the whole thing just go black. So it's like it's turned off, but you can turn it right back on to keep going. So again, that's helpful if you want to just bring the attention back to yourself, or if you're done with your presentation or what have you. That's effective to, again, bring the attention just back to you. So that can be really helpful. Another tip, and probably the most important one, is just practice. Make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure your slides flow the way you want them to. Make sure your information progresses the way that you want it to. If you're using something like Prezi, which is kind of a new online presentation software, make sure you know what you're doing with that. That's a newer thing that a lot of people may not know about. So you can use that to your advantage if you want and seem very impressive. But make sure you know how to use it, make sure you practice with it, and make sure that it works in a number of different circumstances, or in the circumstance you're going to be giving your presentation in, especially in that location. Just make sure that it functions the way it's supposed to. All right, so that's all tips for PowerPoints or slideshows, any other kind of presentation software you want to use. But again, text slides, presentations are just one more type of visual aid. There are several others. You can use tables. So again, tables are helpful for organizing numbers and data. It helps summarize, compare, and contrast that info. So what I mean by a table is you have headings, and you have information under those headings, columns and rows, like an Excel spreadsheet. That's a table, okay, and it helps you organize and visualize information. Charts, same kind of thing. It helps you visualize numerical information. So you have a bar chart, one that goes up and down, or horizontally. It can go either way. It shows differences between categories. Line charts illustrate trends in numerical data. So they show trends over time. They may go up and down, up and down. And then pie charts. I love a good pie chart. They can show percentage of a whole. And they're really easy visual tools to use to help show, different sizes, different percentages, that kind of thing, really easily as part of a whole, right? So pie charts are really useful. Flow charts, kind of the same thing. They represent a flow. So think of like a family tree. You have your grandparents up here, both sets of grandparents, that moves down into your parents, and everything from there, you just spiral down from there. So think of a family tree as a flow chart. It can show progression over time, and it can be really helpful. Others are just pictures. You want to post large images, not necessarily in terms of file size, but in terms of visually on the slide. You want to make sure that you can see it in all the detail. You don't want to necessarily pass photos around the room. That can be helpful. In terms of like visual aids and things, it can be helpful to pass something around the room. But if you're showing an image, it's probably more effective to show that image on a slide rather than passing it around the room, because by the time the last person in the room gets it, you've moved way on, right? If you just post it on the slide, everyone can see it all at once, and then you move on from that. And make sure, again, those pictures are easy enough to see on those slides. Make sure they're high enough resolution that you're able to see them clearly and they don't pixelate out. Because again, if you blow it up too large, it has a tendency to lose its quality. So make sure that it's high quality enough that everyone can see it clearly. Other resources are videos, and these can come from DVDs or CD-ROMs or YouTube, any other online source like Vimeo. That's sort of like a YouTube alternative. So again, the thing with videos is that they take up time in your presentation. So videos can add emphasis and be really useful information tools. But if you are on a strict time limit, so say it's like one of our speeches that's maybe 3 to 5 minutes. If you're showing a 2-minute video in that time frame, that's eating up the majority of your time that you could be talking, okay? And that's kind of a cop-out. So you don't necessarily want to do that. But videos can be really useful, okay? Clips are more helpful than full-length videos, obviously, because you can emphasize certain portions of that video and just see what you want. But again, sometimes a video can say it better than you can. So if that works better for you, or it can say it better, or it goes over a point more clearly than you think you're able to, go ahead and throw it in there. Because again, that can be really helpful. Other visual aids can be yourself. So if you are a cheerleader and you're wanting to show the class how to tumble, okay, so the little flips that they do, you can be your own visual aid, right? If you need to demonstrate something that you know how to do, you then become your own visual aid. Think of athletic abilities. Think if you know how to do a specific craft that's kind of cool, or how to make something really cool, you then become your own visual aid. And again, that helps with processing, that helps with learning. Rather than just passing out instructions to the class, you're actually showing them how to do it so they can follow along. Okay, so again, that can be really helpful. Physical objects, if you want to think of show and tell, if you want to come in and talk about photography, maybe bring in a camera, let some people play with the camera, take some pictures, and let them touch anything firsthand, right? Anything that you can pass around and let them sort of experience on their own. Again, that deals with the touch sensation. So again, that can be helpful for them understanding that item, whatever it may be. And then handouts can be helpful. Not images, so don't pass out the images, but if there's a handout, so if you were doing maybe a cooking demonstration, okay, a really quick cooking demonstration on how to make a sandwich, right, you maybe would pass out instructions, so like a recipe, if you will, on a sheet, so again, they can follow along as they go. Again, handouts, it gives them something to take with them too, so it helps with memory. They're able to recall the information a little better because they have something to take with them when they're done. So handouts can be really helpful. You want to make sure you have enough copies, obviously. If you're giving a speech to a large group, make sure you have enough copies for all of them. Always copy extra. It's always better to have too much than not enough. So if you're using that method, make sure you have enough for everyone. But all those visual aids, so multimedia materials, slides, tables, charts, flowcharts, pictures, videos, physical objects, handouts, or yourself, can all sort of help dual code your speech itself. Again, dual coding just means using more than one sensory aid or more than one sense to help comprehend and understand a topic, whatever that may be. Okay, all this can be really helpful in memorization and retention of that information. Again, just some tips on visual aids before we go. Be ethical. I say that every time, it feels like. But be ethical. Cite your sources if you're using some external sources for information. If you use some images off the internet, make sure you cite where you got those images from. Again, that can just be included in your outline or on the presentation slide itself if you're showing them in a slideshow. Just put the hyperlink at the bottom. That's okay. Again, that just shows some ethics and some credibility on your part and some respect for the author or the creator, right? So you want to make sure that you use that. Make the content easy for your audience to understand. Again, it's meant to supplement what you're doing, so it should help them understand it, not give them something else to have to process. So make sure that does that. Explain them. If you're showing an image, make sure you explain what the image is. If you're throwing a chart up there with some numbers in it, make sure you explain what the chart means. Or a graph, make sure you explain what the bars on the graph mean or the pieces of the pie on the pie chart mean. Make sure you're able to understand those, because if you can't understand them, neither will your audience. So make sure you're able to understand those clearly and explain that to your audience. Be professional. Again, don't do those bouncy little transitions or anything like that. Don't use all these bright, vibrant colors or curly fonts. Again, just be straightforward because, again, that shows professionalism on your part. And when you're not using the visuals, make sure they're not in sight. This is easy to do with a presentation. But if you're not using the visual, make sure it's out of the way because you want the focus to be back on you. Okay? Visuals, again, help in understanding. They can help in understanding and processing of a speech. You just want to make sure that they're effective and useful for the topic at hand. Don't bring in anything that doesn't make sense. Okay? And again, that's difficult kind of for you guys to do here since we're not in a classroom setting. But again, these can be used in the professional world, in the classroom world. Anytime you're giving a presentation, if there's a strong visual, that can help send your message home. Okay? That's chapter 9. That's the last chapter on your third quiz. So I will post that quiz sometime in the near future, so make sure you check out these notes for chapters 7, 8, and 9, and also read your textbook for chapters 7, 8, and 9. Your quiz, again, will come from the textbook, supplemented with some of this information from lecture, so make sure you look that over. The next video we'll go over is chapter 10, and that's going over your informative presentations. So we'll post that before you actually give your informative presentation, so you guys know sort of what I'm expecting for that. If you have any questions, feel free to email me and let me know. Thanks.